All right,
Hi.
Molly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Molly Paolucci. I'm with the Practice Management Club at Tufts, and I just want to thank you for attending tonight. So, one of the things for today's presentation, if you do have any questions, we'll probably do questions at the end. There are two ways to ask questions today. You can type it into the chat box. The other way is at the end, there's a raise your hand function, and you can raise your hand with any questions that you have. So I do want to introduce our speakers tonight. We have Troy and Rich from Advisory Resource Group. Advisory Resource Group is a full service financial firm that provides kind of financial advice to medical professionals to help them really better understand their personal finances and create really great financial plans based on each person's individual situation. And they work with clients all over the country. So we're really lucky to have them tonight, and they're going to be helping us learn a little bit about personal finance and things that we should be thinking about as we get ready to graduate from dental school and become dentists.
Wonderful. Thank you, Molly. Thanks so much for the introduction, and thanks so much, everybody, for having us. Again, my name is Troy Zerveskes. My partner, Rich Sentnor, is also on the call this evening. Exactly as Molly said, we are a financial planning and wealth management firm that works pretty much exclusively with physicians and dentists, and really at all stages of their careers. So those that are really in medical and dental school and recent graduates, all the way to those well into retirement. It's hard for me to say this, but we've been working with Tufts for almost 20 years now. 2003 was my first presentation to the medical school, so my hair is not all that gray, but or at least it doesn't show up all that gray on the call, at least. And again, I'd say we're specialists within our industry, so our clients really are all dentists. So we're here tonight really to help provide and hope add some perspective to you guys. There's a lot going on, and clearly with COVID and all that's gone on in the last couple of years, and there's so many things that are thrown at you at this stage. And I think that's the other thing, Molly. We've got people on the call this evening really at all stages of dental school, correct? So hopefully we can offer nuggets for everyone, but let's go ahead and get started. So our goals for this evening are really to get you started, right? This is not a presentation about trying to make you an expert at any one financial concept. We're not going to throw Roth IRA contribution limits at you. This is really just to give you sort of a sense of what is the big picture, what are the things that I'm going to have to be thinking about, and what are the things that are going to start to get thrown at me as I begin to give thought to planning and sort of moving forward on these fronts. Rich and I always say this, that this is about building habits that, now that will last a lifetime. It's like diet and exercise or brushing and flossing, right? It's doing those things correctly on a daily basis that will translate into weeks, months, years, decades, and your lifetime. And so if you can be thinking about these habits now, it really does translate into the things that you need to be thinking about later on in life. A lot of times people think, but it's too early to think about these things. It's really not, because it's about building those muscles and those good habits. We're going to talk about protecting your income. We're going to talk about that age-old question of finding the balance between debt repayment and saving. That's probably the #1 question we get among all medical and dental students. Understanding the importance of planning and avoiding what we call the doctor traps. Our agenda this evening is, it's really 5 parts, but we'll call it 4 parts because our slide says so. Financial Literacy 101, Debt and Credit Management, Risk Management, and then we're going to do a practice purchase crash course along with some case studies. Those case studies are very in-depth, and we're probably going to gloss over them, but we want to at least begin to get you started about some of the things that we're thinking about and trying to work with our clients with.
Yeah, and keep in mind, we're going to try to go through things fairly quickly. I know this is a little bit different. Normally, we do these presentations in person. There's a lot of interaction back and forth and questions. In the new world that we're in right now, doing them virtually is a little bit different for Troy and I. We are obviously really like the feedback we pride ourselves on kind of the financial literacy piece and being able to answer all of your questions. So do understand that, if you have questions, we can kind of hold them to the end, but even afterwards, our contact information will be out there. Our website, you can go and look for that. We are a resource that's available to you guys, as you do have a very unique kind of situation and skill set as you're, graduating from dental school and heading out into the real world. Even if you're within dental school, a lot of things like student debt and so forth. So we are going to, in the essence of time, kind of move through things pretty quickly here tonight, but we want to make sure that you guys understand that we are available to you even after this as a resource to be able to answer any questions that you guys have.
Yeah, we might look familiar. I think we gave a similar presentation to the incoming students. I think it was the spring before COVID, if I recall. So spring of 19, I think, was the last time we were actually on campus. We've done this a few times since, but I think the last time we were on campus. So before we get started, the last themes we're going to talk about today is it's a great time to be a dentist. I can tell you that. I've seen your future. But in all seriousness, the incomes that we see among our clients, the toys that you guys get to play with now compared to those even 10 years ago are more fun and exciting. The impact that you can provide to your clients, your patients, is greater and better than it's ever been before. So I think it's a really exciting time to be a dentist. The other thing that I'll say is I have really happy clients. They really like being dentists, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. There's a lot of careers that's not the case. I can tell you I've got a lot of physicians that aren't happy, but I think dentists on the spectrum are a pretty happy group, so that's a good thing. At the same time, though, that comes with a lot of responsibility, right? A dental education is not inexpensive. Many of you know that. Right? There's significant amounts of financial debt. There's big decisions around practice purchase versus associateship, and where we go to become an associate. When we become an associate, where we want to get that job and secure that job. So there's a lot of responsibilities in becoming a dentist. And there's what we like to say two ends of the spectrum, I think, of how dentists interpret this at times. So one end of the spectrum is those individuals that love the planning side of it and love the financial side of it. And then we have the others that this is more of like a necessary evil, like, it's just not my thing. I really like the clinical side of it. I'm not so much into all the other sides. And I think people need to begin recognizing who they are sort of early on. Because it's going to determine in a lot of ways how you solicit information. Even if you look at like modern business acumen now, it's not about having to know everything about everything. It's beginning to know what you don't know and how you outsource that. And I think, and again, even as you look at specialists within dentistry, it's important to know when should I be farming this out to a specialist versus trying to do it myself. So again, I think that becomes an important concept in this information as well. We're going to talk about running yourself like a business, right? So businesses think about their debt and how they leverage that debt and how they're making the most income and really wringing that sponge for efficiency and their decision making. And we're going to argue that you guys should all do that right now. From this moment forward, you should be thinking of yourself as a business. Where do I get leverage, right? Is this a good decision or a bad decision? Should I be specializing? Should I not be? Right, and beginning to take a step back and look at yourself like you are a business. You could have invested, the money that you have into your dental career in a lot of different things. You've invested it in yourself, and it's really important that you, again, think of yourself like that business. Because again, $500,000, you could have bought a company, a gas station. You could have done a lot of different things with it, right? So the last piece, to step back and make decisions in the context of a plan. That's a really important theme that we're going to talk about. So enough of the setup, let's get into the good stuff. So Rick, why don't I take the first part, and then I've got one more slide that I wanted to show you. So this actually comes from Professor Colucci. So I don't believe, Molly, that everybody here has taken her class yet, but I believe some might have.
Yeah, that's correct. Actually, right now, only the fourth year dental students have taken the class. So the first 3 years haven't taken the class yet.
Okay. So you might see this slide pretty soon, because this came right out of Luis's presentation, but it's really the top mistakes that new graduates make, which is not having a budget, not having a short and a long-term financial plan, and not having a short and long-term career plan. So again, we're just going to begin to scratch the surface on these things tonight. And I can tell you that you have such an amazing resource in Professor Colucci. And so she's going to really get into a lot of the specifics that we're just going to begin introducing this evening. So Rich, I'll just take this first part and then I'll let you jump into budgeting. Sound good?
Perfect.
Okay. So the first theme of sort of financial planning 101 that we'll work with clients at any stage of their career is to look at how we begin prioritizing decisions. And the first priority, the first step of any plan is to make sure that we have a strong enough foundation. So what's a strong foundation financially? It's having cash in the bank, a liquid reserve, an emergency fund. It's having the appropriate insurances, our health insurance, as we'll talk about tonight, disability insurance. If we have a family, it's life insurance and estate planning documents. It's all those things that are going to catch us if we slip. Once we've done the first layer, we can then move to the second layer, which is retirement planning and investing in those things that are a little bit more fun and exciting, that are going to help us accomplish our goals. Excuse me. The very top layer are things that are most risky or speculative, investing in a friend's business or buying individual stock, things of that nature. But the thought process here is that if we don't have a strong enough foundation and something happens, we're going to rob from the top to try to feed the bottom. And if whatever it is bad enough, our whole house or our whole financial pyramid falls over. And so the importance here, and the concept here, is that for many people at this stage, and even once they graduate, is really just going to be about building that first layer. It's about solidifying themselves for the rest of their career so that they have a strong foundation to build from. It's not that they graduate on a Saturday and then on a Monday are investing in their stock portfolio. It might be for some, but for most of you, it's really going to be about establishing that cash reserve, doing those basic boring things at the bottom that you can then build from. And Molly, we did say we'd hold the questions from the end, but if you think there's an obvious question that the old group would ask, feel free to butt in and ask it.
Okay.
Rich, do you want to take budgeting?
Yeah, so one of the things that we talk to all of our clients about, especially when we're first sitting down with them, and the basic kind of heartbeat, like we talk about it with our medical clients all the time, this is the vital signs of any good financial plan. And it's understanding the cash flow, your budget. And it sounds very basic. And a lot of people, typically when we give these presentations to the group, we'll always ask people, how many people live off of a budget? It's usually somewhere in the, 1/3 range. This is something that whether you're a first year or fourth year, this is something that you can start doing immediately that's going to help you throughout the course of your entire career, right? So we deal with this whether we're dealing with someone who's fresh out of dental school or an experienced dentist that's been practicing for 20 years. You have to understand the difference between what comes into your business and then what goes out, right? And again, we're running ourselves like a business. So if we're talking about our own personal life, it's still the same thing. So the basic definition of a budget is really the difference between what comes in, your income, your salary, whatever you're making, versus less what you are spending or your expenses that are going out. And whatever's left over at the end of the day is your discretionary income. We hope that it's cash flow positive, right? So we're going to assume that since you guys are going to be graduating and you're going to be working, that you are going to be cash flow positive. So that is your discretionary income. And the basic, information for the start of any financial plan is what is the best use of that discretionary income. But before we can get to that point, we have to really dissect the budget and make sure we understand that we're working with a good budget, right? So the first thing that we always do when we try to tell people to sit down is identify your goals and write them down. Understand, what are you doing this budget for? Are you hoping to be able to save for a house? Are you hoping to be able to buy a car? Are you hoping to be able to buy a practice? Whatever it is, identify what those are before you start going through your budget, right? Understand what your income is. If you're coming in and you're just a salaried employee, it's going to be pretty easy. Your paycheck is what it is, and that's what you have coming in. If you're buying into a practice, then it gets a little bit more tricky as far as what, the income could be a little bit more variable at times. Most of what we see with the younger dentists that are starting out, you're going to get, a salary and you're going to start with a certain income. The real crux of this is what are your expenses and really dissecting what those are. A lot of times we'll sit down with a young dentist and I'll say, do you have a budget? And they say, yeah, I do. Oh, let me take a look at it. And it's, rent, cell phone, miscellaneous. All right, that's not a true budget, right? You need to dig into it. You need to understand where you're spending all of your money. You need to do a little bit of research. Typically, it's pretty easy to just say, I put everything on a credit card so I can dissect my credit card statement every month and get a pretty good idea as to what it is. We don't have to go down to the penny, but you have to understand where your money's going. Even the kind of one-time expenses, we see it all the time. Oh, my friend got married and I had to fly across the country, and bachelorette party, and I had to do, a dress and everything else. Those type of things are always going to come up. So you're going to need to have something like that in your budget in order to really be successful to be able to do it. Once you're able to do that, what we recommend is preparing trial budgets. And this is a really good process that we recommend going through, because it allows you to basically see how certain changes inside your budget are really going to affect the bottom line. And that's really what it comes down to. While you're starting out, is really understanding what is that bottom line, and then what's the best use of that to help progress and to help drive my financial plan forward for the long haul. So should we go to the next slide where we do the... All right, so before we get to the kind of trial budgets and going through those type of things, the monthly expenses that you have, and this I talked about a little bit, you're going to have your basic fixed monthly expenses, right? So most of the time it's going to be your rent, maybe a car payment, maybe your cell phone, things that you pay every month that are typically the same thing. Those are your fixed expenses. Those are really easy. The variable expenses are the ones that are going to be a little bit more tricky to be able to come up with. And again, the easiest way that we usually work with them is to basically say, what's your average credit card bill every month? If everything goes on the credit card and then I pay it off every month, that would really cover your variable expenses. It's an easy way for you to be able to kind of do your budget without, having that negative connotation of, oh, I need to go through every single one of my expenses. I don't want to do that. It takes too long. We're not looking for you to make this a project. We just want to make sure that you have everything captured within your expenses. Once you're able to do that, is when we want to start going through and looking at the different, budgets that you have and doing some trial budgets. You want to go to the next one, Troy, for an example here?
Yeah, I think I'm just going to add one more thing here, which is the idea of sometimes people will say, well, why do I need to do this, right? I don't have any money right now. I barely have enough to live, right? There's two things. One is it's about flexing those muscles and building those habits. But two, it's being able to revert to the mean. And Rich mentioned, you've got a bachelor party or a bachelorette party, and you spend way more money than you thought you were going to that month. Well, you want to, what is it that I need to come back to, right? What can happen is if we don't have a budget, we don't have something that we're trying to work towards on a monthly basis, when those things happen, we can get into a tailspin, and it could be 3 or 4 months before we come back to something that's, call it responsible. The idea of having a budget is, oh, we know we had a month that was really off typical, but now we can jump back into it and kind of get back, hit the ground running. So just an important concept, because almost in every time we have these sessions, somebody asks, I don't have any money, how can I do a budget, right? It's still important with wherever you're at, whatever stage of life, to be able to have that need to revert to.
Yeah, and it's a great point. I mean, it's something that works out all the time, even with people that are in school, right? And they're saying, I don't really have a budget, I'm just borrowing money every month to be able to pay for all my stuff, to pay my student loans, my housing. That doesn't, you can still do a budget there. And you'll see later on in our presentation, we talk about it, is if you can budget yourself and borrow less money, it's going to help you significantly later on down the road. So that's where kind of what Troy was talking about. If you can try to get yourself to stick to that budget the best that you can, it basically holds you accountable over the course of time, because I can't tell you how many times we said, I don't even know what I owe. I've just basically borrowed everything that I possibly can to pay for everything. And then they come out on the other side, and people are floored by how large the number has actually gotten. Anything that you can do to help manage that along the way is going to be significant. So here's our example of our young doctor. I think we call him Chris, right, Troy? So
That's right.
Chris is a first-year associate. He comes out. His income is $200,000 a year. After taxes, benefits, etc. His take-home pay, and that's what
maybe Chris's income is 150, and he has spousal income, or she has spousal income of 50,000, something like that. So just to make everybody feel comfortable with the assumptions, don't feel like you have to get out and make 200 as an associate. It's saying 200 of household income.
Correct. Sorry about that. Yep. So his take-home pay, their take-home pay after at the end of the day is $10,000 a month. The student debt payments are $2,500 a month. They have a mortgage, and the mortgage payment is $2,800 a month. We've kind of pushed everything together in the utilities, groceries, auto, gas, cable, cell phone bill. of $1,500 a month. We have some entertainment, travel, clothes, kind of the discretionary piece of it at $1,500 a month, car payment, your basic automobile, homeowners, disability, and life insurance. And at the end of the day, we come down to our discretionary income, and it's $600 a month. How is Chris doing? Okay, not bad, right? Chris is cash flow positive. We're not incurring debt. We're actually paying down debt, and we're making debt payments, and we're making mortgage payments. But, $600 a month isn't going to blow anyone away. So we have Chris kind of sharpen the pencil and go back and do a trial budget and say, is there any place that we can actually find some differences? And as we talked about, the top line item is never really going to change. Our income is what it is. I mean, it will go up every year, and then there are certain phases of your life where you will see big jumps if you change jobs or buy in or partnership, or whatever the case may be. But for intents of the budget, it is what it is. We have options with our debt payment, and maybe we take a longer repayment plan on our debt, and our cash flow changes, and we're at $1,800 a month instead of $2,500. We decide we're going to buy maybe a smaller house or move a little bit further away from a high, rent area, so we can save a little bit of money there. We tighten our belt on kind of groceries, utilities, and gas, and so forth. Same thing with our entertainment budget. Maybe we buy a little bit less expensive or a used car. And at the end of the day, we've sharpened our pencil, and now where do we come down to? So now we have $2,250 a month. Seems a lot different than just $600 a month, and it is. With the $2,250 a month of discretionary income, there's a lot of different things that you can choose to do with that, and you can split that up in a lot of different ways. Do I want to pay down higher interest debt? Is there other things that I'm saving for? Can I use that money to save for, retirement, for kids' college, for buying into a practice, whatever the case may be? It gives you a lot more flexibility. So this is an exercise that we think is very useful and very important for everybody to go through and figure out where you want to fall out, right? You can really, tighten the belt and try to get that number as high as possible. And most times we find that people are going to fall out somewhere in the middle there where they're comfortable. They've made some sacrifices, but they're not completely, sacrificing everything in their life.
Yep. Yeah. Just remember that it's an iterative process. This is something that you could do 3, 4, 5, 6 times before you get to the result that you're ultimately looking for that's based on all of your goals and objectives. So what we like to say is that your budget is only as good as the mechanism in which you set up to track it, right? And this is the adage that we'll meet with someone and say, hey, do you have a budget? And they'll say, yeah. And they'll pull it out, but I haven't looked at it in 6 months. Well, you don't really have a budget if that's the case. So there's some really neat tools that exist now. We'll just kind of run through. I'd also say that we don't really care which tool people use, right? We've had engineers that have come to us with a logbook who have written down, every expense that they've ever had forever down to the penny. Awesome, that works. Software, right? There's Microsoft Money and Quicken and QuickBooks, more on the business side of things. But these tools that, again, if you take the time to put the right input in, then you'll get really good output. The problem is if you're not going to take that time to do the input, you're not going to get very good output. But these tools can work incredible to be able to help you track these. And then lastly, there's these tools online now. There's a zillion of them, but a number of years ago, sort of mint.com was sort of the real front runner in that space. But essentially, it helps you create the budget, and then it helps you keep track of how you're spending accounts each month towards what you said it is that you wanted to do. So again, any one of them work fine, but it's just that idea of saying, yes, I'm going to commit to watching what it is that I spend and making sure that it's connected to what I said it was, what it was that I wanted to be trying to spend. Rich, want me to take this one?
Yeah, go on.
All right. So we tend to say in these things, if you remember one thing tonight, but this is one of those nuggets of if you remember one thing tonight, which is the only way that busy professionals make progress, we believe, is by paying themselves first. And again, it doesn't matter if you're making 50,000, 500,000, per year. It's this concept of we have to automate our savings. You guys are going to be very busy, and life only gets more busy as you start adding children and all of those things. And so it's really important that you sort of set yourself up to make progress in spite of yourself. And so this is our graphical depiction of how we do that. So the dollar sign is your paycheck. We'll come back to that, as well as a net. And then if you look at you on the right side, that's Chris again. And again, we have this net in the middle, which I'll explain in a second. We have these buckets that we call them, and each of those buckets corresponds to the time horizon that you might spend the money within them. So a short-term bucket would be savings account, checking account, money that you could get your hands on today if you needed it. The stark opposite of that is your long-term buckets. These would be retirement savings, IRAs and 401ks and things of that nature, things that you'll get tax advantages from if you're willing to kind of lock that money up for the long term. Then there's midterm, which is sort of like what we would call our wealth bucket. It's not money in cash, it's not money in retirement, it's sort of that money that we could use to do things that we, buy another house or take a trip, something along those lines. And the last bucket is debt reduction. I want to pay my loans down faster than the amortization schedule, meaning it's a 20-year loan and I want to try to pay it off in 15 years. So what that net is essentially a bill that you set up to yourself to funnel the money down into whichever bucket you deem to be most purposeful given your stage of life. So let's go back to what we said earlier with that financial pyramid about we want to establish that cash reserve. So if Chris has $2,000 a month, in his first paycheck, the thought there, the first month of his income, it might be everything gets funneled down into that short-term bucket. 6 months later, 8 months later, now Chris has got $10,000, $15,000 in savings. Maybe he says, at this point, I want to start contributing to my retirement plan at work. He puts a little bit less towards cash, and then he starts putting some towards long-term. Again, maybe there's his debt strategy. He wants to start accelerating debt, and so he's going to make those additional payments to his debt. The idea is that all this can be set up. It can all be made automatic, especially through online banking and so forth. You don't have to give thought to this. So again, you can get to the end of a quarter, 6 months, a year, and look back and say, look at all this progress that I made in these different areas. The last piece, which I think is incredibly important, is whatever you let get through the net is yours to do whatever you want with, right? You work hard, you sacrifice. It's okay to spend money. And I feel like sometimes we counsel our clients into saying, you're allowed to spend money. You just need to spend money in the context of a bigger plan. And so if you determine in that budget that $500 is for you or $1,000 or whatever that number is, then you should have zero guilt about spending that money. Go to Foxwoods. It really doesn't matter because you've done everything else correctly to make sure that you're making progress towards those goals. So I think that's an important concept because sometimes people get guilty when they spend money. I should have never taken that trip. I should have never done that. We think that's a really terrible way to live life when you work really hard and sacrifice. But it can also be really bad if you don't do the planning beforehand because then you don't deprive yourself of anything, and we see that too.
So Molly
is really important. Sorry. Yep.
Molly has put a question in the chat here that I think is a really good question regarding a lot of banks will require dentists to save a certain percentage to be able to finance or buy their practice, and what's the average time it takes for younger clients to get that amount of money saved? And it's a great question. We go into it in a lot more detail further on in our presentation, but it's something that you should definitely be thinking about when you're dealing this whole kind of pay yourself first. We don't specifically talk about that here, but that could be a midterm goal or a long-term goal, something that you need the money for. If I had to put a number on it, it really depends on how big the practice is and what the rest of your financial situation, but it's a key component in the last portion of our presentation, which is, what mistakes people make with regard to purchasing a practice. And making sure that you are focused on knowing that that is a key component in being able to purchase a practice.
Yeah, if you let us punt on that one, we're going to get into a whole section on that in the end because it also, and it's such a great question because it also plays into debt strategy, right? So if I pay my debt off as fast as I can, I'm not going to accumulate savings as quickly, which means that could have an impact on how quickly I pay off my debt. Or sorry, how quickly I can get into a practice. So let us punt on that if we can, and I promise we'll get back to it later. Oops. So again, we already talked about the different buckets. I'll just let it cycle through real quick. So we're not going to get into this in too much detail, but the question always comes up when we're speaking live. So we wanted to at least throw a slide in here, which is, what are the things that I need to consider if I'm going to make an investment? And what we say is you need to be able to answer these 4 questions and speak to them intelligently. And if you can, you probably are on the way to making a good decision with that investment, which is what's your tolerance for risk? What's your time horizon? What are the expenses and how is it taxed? Any investment you ever make for the rest of your life, you should be able to answer those 4 questions. There's many other questions that will generally go into that as well, but those 4 questions as it relates to planning and investing are very important.
And we can do an entire 1.5 hour presentation just on that. So we're going to kind of, go through a couple of slides here and talk about, the high level component of that, because I think there's a lot of other information that we need to get to.
Yeah, definitely. So the question that we also get often is, well, when should I work with a professional, and would a professional want to work with me? And so what we say is this is a personal decision that everybody has to make. And again, if you go back to that spectrum that we talked about in the beginning, there's some people who love this stuff and there's some people who, aren't so much into it. But we believe that there's 3 things that you need to have in order to do these things yourself, which is the time, the know-how, and the interest. We have some clients, our clients are brilliant, right? They oftentimes will have the know-how and the interest, they just don't have the time, or they'll have the know-how and the time, but they don't have the interest, right? So, but you need to have those 3 things. Another component of what an advisor does is perspective. We'll sometimes say we've seen your future, right? I've seen what a dentist goes through when they're about to buy into a practice. I've seen where they're at when their practice begins to stagnate and they need to add on. I've seen when somebody gets later in their career and their back hurts and they don't want to go to work anymore and what that means. So the advice that we provide will oftentimes be based on that perspective of the things that we've seen. The experience is that a lot of times people feel like, oh my gosh, I have the most unique question ever. The reality is that we run into these questions, I'd say very much in your practice, right? When you see a tooth that's impacted, I'm like, oh my gosh, the dentist's never gonna have seen this thing before. And you guys are like, I see this every day. It's sort of the same thing. And the last thing is that people don't think about their money, they feel about their money. We sometimes say it's the same reason that surgeons don't operate on their children, right? Because it's an emotional experience where somebody who's looking at your situation objectively doesn't feel that emotion. They just say, no, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. So again, that's sort of the topic of and if you're going to be a do-it-yourselfer, again, I think that's great as well. But again, it just comes back to knowing who you are and what it is that you want to do. So this is just a little fun partway through. Multiple choice. What are the biggest traps that new dentists fall into? Overbuying a house or a car, making decisions that could impact a practice purchase, buying everything you denied yourself of during training. Anyone? All of the above. All right, let's have some fun. Rich, you want to take this?
Yeah, so one of the things that we talk about all the time is, and we get asked all the time, is about credit score and how do I protect my credit and how do I understand what my credit score is. And before we get into that, we really want to kind of impress upon everyone that credit is an extremely important thing, and it's going to affect pretty much a lot of the decisions, major decisions that you make in your life. The better your credit is, the easier it's going to be to purchase a house, to get financing for a practice, to be able to buy equipment, do all the things that you want to do. Anytime that you're going to borrow money, they're going to look at your credit score. The better the credit score you have, the more money you're going to be able to buy, the lower the interest rate is going to be on that money that you're going to borrow, which means the less you're going to have to pay to the bank, the less your monthly payments are going to be. So making sure that you understand what your credit score is, what your credit history is extremely important. And it's something that we recommend that everybody, take a look at least once a year to make sure that you know what's there. First and foremost, open your mail. And again, today, in this day and age, that means open your emails, because I think everything is done electronically now. They're doing away with paper statements and everything else. But if you get something in the mail from any one of your lenders, anything that has to do with credit, open it, read it, take the time to be able to go through it. A lot of times there's different components of that where if you've made X amount of payments, without missing a payment, you can get a lower interest rate, but it requires that you actually sign up for that in the email that they sent you. So make sure you go through that, and you can see on the bottom there, we say be organized. This is something that you absolutely want to make sure that you're extremely organized with. Know your debt, all right? Know who your lenders are, know what the loans are, know what the loan terms are, the period, the interest rate. Make sure all of that stuff before you graduate, you have a good handle on it, and you at least know what they are, and you have all that information in one place. There are a lot of people, Troy and myself being, some of them, there are people that can help you make decisions on that, but you have to know exactly what the information is to be able to translate that so that people can help you make that decision. So understand what your debt is, understand what the terms are, and really make sure that you stay organized and open your mail. There are 3 reporting services, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian, that will basically track and report your credit scores. We recommend making sure that you use them to be able to understand exactly what your credit score is, and make sure you review your history of your credit to make sure that there isn't something on there that really doesn't belong to you, or that there was a mistake, which does happen, where you're like, oh, I actually did pay that off and it's still showing up here and it's negatively affecting my credit score. On the next slide, I think we talk about what the components are of the credit score. Do you have something to add here, Troy?
Yeah, I was just going to add one thing, that you can go to any one of these credit, any one of the Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian, and you can pay like $40 and get all 3 scores and all 3 reports. There are ways in which you can get a free score and a free report, but you can go to any one of them and get all 3 scores and all 3 reports. And I do it like in the spring every year, just as a matter of practice, to say, is everything correct with my credit? Because as Rich said, it can be a pretty devastating surprise if you go to purchase something and all of a sudden realize that your credit's been impacted. And sometimes it can just be an error, but that error can sometimes take 6 weeks, a couple of months to fix. So just the best practice that you can go in and order your score and your reports from each one of those.
Yeah, and the biggest thing with dealing with credit score, so we kind of put this up because people always wonder, what are the things that affect my, credit score negatively, and what should I do or shouldn't I do? The number one thing to understand is late payments and missed payments are the biggest component of what's going to negatively impact your credit score. So regardless of what you can or cannot pay, and if you have a credit card with an outstanding balance, don't just ignore it and hope that it's going to go away. That's probably the worst decision that you can make. Make some sort of payment. Call your lenders, whether it's your student loans, your credit cards. They are willing to negotiate a little bit if you actually have the conversation with them. Don't just say, oh, I'm going to skip this payment and I'll make it up next month. That's going to put you in a hole that's going to be really hard to get out of. So missed payments, late payments are the biggest thing that will negatively affect it. Second to that is the amount that you owe, the ratio of the balances that you have on your cards to the credit limit. So each credit card is going to be issued with a certain credit limit. If you know you're going to have an outstanding balance, the higher the credit limit that you can get, the better off you're going to be. And just overall, how much debt you have out there is going to impact it. The rest of the things, people we hear all the time, oh, if I go to a bunch of different car dealerships and they all pull my credit, is that going to negatively impact it? It is, but it's not overly significant unless you're doing it every single day, right? If every time you go to a new store and, I have a Banana Republic credit card, and then I have a Gap credit card, and then I have a Costco credit card, and every time you go somewhere, you're opening up their credit card, then yes, that's going to start to affect it significantly. But if on occasion it happens, that is not going to be anywhere near the negative impact that a missed or a late payment would be.
That's right. Bum, bum, bum. So if we were live, we would ask, does anybody in the room have debt? And you'd all look at me and chuckle and say, ha ha, you jerk, funny, right?
Occasionally they'll throw things at them.
Yeah, exactly. The reality is we know that many of you have debt, and we'll also ask then, well, what do you have to show for it? Now that the room starts to get a little bit more serious. Well, what do you mean, what do I have to show for it? Well, what we'd argue is that you have golden hands and a platinum head, right? And that's, oops, I'm sorry, I'm going down the wrong path, Rich. I'm setting up the wrong topic.
You are.
I am. That's what happens when we talk at 8 o'clock at night. Sorry. So debt management. So this goes back to the concept that we started in the beginning, which is running yourself like a business, right? what do you see on the balance sheet of every business? Right? I'm not sure how many of you are regularly reading balance sheets, but you'll see debt, liabilities. Right? Well, why does the company have a liability? They do it because it creates leverage for them. They can get further by having that debt than if they didn't. And so if I asked you all, how do you feel about your debt? That's the question that I meant to say. People would say nervous, anxious, not sure. I don't think about it. That's another response that we sometimes get. And what we'll say in response is, we don't mind your debt. And everybody looks sort of puzzled, but that's exactly why we say that, is that debt's a leverage. You wouldn't be sitting where many of you are right now if you didn't have the debt to allow you to be there. And that debt is going to allow you to earn the income that you're going to be able to earn as a dentist, and have the lifestyle and create the impact and practice the craft that's important to you. So I think that's an important concept to remember, because sometimes we can only focus on the negative and the scary and the anxiety. But the reality is that if used correctly, like all the different companies in our country, right, that debt is a good thing and is going to help you get further in your career. That being said, back to one of our themes tonight of responsibility and running yourself like a business, debt requires a significant amount of responsibility and making sure that we're making the right decisions around it, because those decisions are going to impact a number of different potential planning paths that we take, purchasing a practice, etc. So the first thing is, so what we want to do is just go through some key themes around debt. Again, this alone could be a 3-hour session. So again, we're just going to scratch the surface. But the first is that everyone has a different situation and philosophy, right? Some people aren't concerned about their debt. They don't even think about it, where others can barely sleep at night. So that's the first thing, and that might have an impact on how you deal with it. The next is to pay off debt without sacrificing savings. Again, this can be a 20-minute conversation as well. But the idea here is that just having no debt gets you back to zero, right? At the debt loads that we're coming out with these days, in order to retire, educate our children, purchase homes, potentially purchase a practice, all of those things, if we just operate in a vacuum and only pay off debt, that's often going to put us in a negative position in accomplishing those other goals as well. So we have to, in most cases, take a more happy medium strategy. I did have a physician once. He lived with his mother in New York, and he spent like $3,000 a month, and he was an anesthesiologist, and he put everything else to his debt, and he paid it all off in like 4 years. If you're willing to do that, we can usually get behind a strategy like that. What we can tell you is that that almost never happens. So again, everybody has a different situation and philosophy. We're going to talk about something called the Rule of 72. We'll jump over that and come back to it in a moment. Rich mentioned a minute ago about being organized, right? You have to know who you know what to, right? You have to know if you miss a payment each month, and that's going to have, again, further ramifications on your credit, as Rich mentioned, which can impact many other things. So being organized with your debt is incredibly important. And you've got a great financial aid office, and so use them as a resource, right? If you don't fully understand something as it relates to your loans, schedule an appointment to talk with them. They're an incredible resource, and I don't say that lightly. We work with a bunch of different schools, and Tufts has a great department. So creating a debt consolidation spreadsheet, a lot of along the lines of what Rich said, just again, know who you owe what to. There's reviewing repayment options, right? So you have options in terms of, with your direct loans of how you finance those. And then you have options on the private side of things where you could refinance your debt in order to potentially get, different, better interest rates and benefits. So again, but you want to understand what are the pros and cons when I do that, but just understand that you do have those options available to you. And again, that'd be part of those refinancing strategies. And then, I think financial aid likes us to say this, but is to borrow the least amount that you can, right? The goal here is not to say, hey, I'm going to live a party, live a life of luxury while I'm in dental school. The idea is you just need enough to get by so that you're borrowing the least amount that you have to make things that much easier for you when you get out on the other side. So and that's part of where the budgeting comes in, right? If I've done a good job at managing my month-to-month expenses, maybe I wouldn't need to take out quite as much in aid. So again, you're trying to borrow the least amount that you can. So the rule of 72 is sort of a fun fact, which says if I divide the interest rate that I could earn on some hypothetical investment into 72, it'll tell me how long it takes for my money to double, right? And so this is sort of a fun fact when you're thinking about, if I need to accumulate for a certain goal, and if I can get 10% on that money, it will double every 7 years, right? So sort of a fun fact, but it also has really significant applications in terms of paying off our debt, right? So let's just say we don't do anything but pay off our debt for 10 years, or let's just say it's 10 years for our example here. And so when you're 35 years old, you have $50,000. Again, if we can get 10% in some hypothetical investment, our money will double every 10.2 years. So when we're 45, we have 100, and we're 55, we have 200, and we're 65, we have 400. Well, that's pretty cool. We just accumulated $400,000, right? Well, let's say that same individual had that 50,000 when they were 25. 35, 100, 45, 200, 55, 400, 65, 800. The impact is in that last double. That's what allows people to have, they're $2 million at retirement to 4 million, right? They're 1 million to 2 million, they're 4 million. So it's that last, it's not the impact today, it's that impact 30 years down the road that makes the decisions that you make today so important. So we'll sometimes meet with people who haven't started. They've partied for the first 10 years of their life. They haven't saved anything. And then they're like, okay, I'm ready now. We can never get that time back. And the amount that you have to save additional to get that time back is so disproportionate from that person that just made good diet and exercise, brushing and flossing decisions every day, that again, turned the weeks into months, months into years, years into decades. So again, just a little bit of a fun fact, but sort of a neat way to think about these things. And I realize I'm keeping the pace up here, but we've got a lot of material and I want to make sure we go through it. So Molly, slow me down or ask clarifying questions if you think I'm going too fast. So risk management is the idea of filling that foundation in that financial pyramid. It's saying, hey, I need to make sure that I'm protecting the downside. If I slip, I want to make sure that I'm caught. And so we're going to talk specifically about disability in a moment, but it's things like life insurance, our home and renters insurance, health insurance, malpractice, property and casualty. It's all those things, again, that are going to catch us if we slip. Excuse me, and some of them can have an impact, again, on our ability to buy a practice, right? A bank oftentimes is going to need a guarantee in life insurance, right? So if we're not able to get that coverage, that could have an impact on our ability to purchase a practice. They've lightened up on some of these things, but the overall theme is the same, that oftentimes we're going to need risk management in order to be able to secure certain tools. And so it plays into the overall process of what we're trying to accomplish. So this is where I started earlier, which is, what do you have to show for your education? People look at me and say, well, what are you talking about? And what we say is that you have these golden hands and a platinum head. And the only way for you to make good on everything that you've put into your career so far is to be able to practice. If anything gets in the way of your ability to practice, then what happens? How do we make good on all of the sacrifice and everything that we put into it? The only way that we have to protect it right now is through something called disability insurance. I would suspect that most of you at this stage have probably heard of this at some level, but it's a really important element of your planning and sort of the first thing that most of you will do as sort of the financial decision of either before graduation or after graduation. But we recommend that everybody gets their disability insurance in yesterday. You can technically do it after your second year, so you could do it in your third year if you want to. Most people do it when they graduate, but we're proponents of you got to get this done yesterday. And Rich, I know you normally take this. I'm just going to kind of speed through it if that's okay.
Go for it.
Which is the idea that when you purchase this stuff when you're young and you're healthy, it can guarantee your ability to protect your income later, right? So even when you purchase this as an associate making $150,000 a year, it guarantees your ability to insure your income at $400,000 a year down the road. So it takes that risk off the table of having an income that's no longer protected. And that's really the reason why we recommend that people do it as early and as soon as possible to take that risk off the table. There's lots of different nuances and definitions and ways in which this coverage should be purchased. And these are things that we're always happy to sit down and talk with people about in more detail. But again, you want to make sure that it's designed correctly and appropriately for a dentist. There's a lot of artistic license that can be taken in the design of these policies, and you want to make sure that it's designed correctly. Rich, anything I forgot?
Yeah, I'm just going to add one thing. I think the most important thing to make sure you understand when it comes to disability or even life insurance, it's not a product that you can just buy off the shelf, that you have to qualify for it. You have to qualify for it medically. So the key components that go into it are your age and your health. So you're never going to be younger or more healthy than you are right now, even though some people can get in better shape and so forth. As we age, we don't tend to get healthy. We start taking more medications and so forth and so on. So it's another reason I've seen it, in the 22 years that I've been doing this, so many times where a dentist will want it, doesn't care what it costs, and just can't qualify for it. So the earlier that you can do that, that is the most important thing, because I promise you, you don't want to be going through your whole career without having that safety net of knowing if God forbid something happens to my hands and I can't practice chairside, I'm not going to be able to earn income. Disability insurance will replace that income for you if that event happens to you. So it's something that you want to do while you're young and you're healthy. And then, like Troy said, take that risk off the table. So yeah, that would be the only thing that I would add to that.
Yep, and again, you're a good group. You're going to get advertised to. You're going to get lots of flyers in the mail and so forth. It's something that's pretty common in again the medical and dental world. It's important.
Yeah, but keep in mind that there are not a lot of people that understand the nuances of the product. You guys want to make sure that you're getting the right coverage for you that covers you if you can't practice as a dentist. So make sure you're getting the right policy and you're working with someone that knows what it means to insure a dentist for what they actually need.
That's right. And there's some very good quality companies. So, I've seen this many times before. They say, oh, this is my parents' insurance person, and they'll recommend a product that isn't appropriate for a dentist. Again, very good company, but just not a dental appropriate product. So again, very confusing, but it's a really important element of it. So our themes tonight so far: step back and make the decisions in the context of a plan. Importance of budget and trial budgeting at all stages, regardless of income. Saving structure and paying yourself first. Things to consider before making an investment. Should you work with an advisor? Avoiding the doctor traps. Protecting your credit. Being an active participant in your debt strategy. Risk management for today to set yourself up for tomorrow. And practice purchase preparation, which we're going to talk about now. So real quick, we've hit on a lot of these things so far, but the idea is that there's risks that we face, and these risks and decisions will build on one another. And so we're constantly making decisions, and these decisions are consequential to our long-term success. So that ability to step back and look at everything in the big picture is important. And what we're going to talk a little bit about in a moment is that just like you guys have tools that are better today than they were 10 years from now, 10 years ago, excuse me, we have better tools as well to help support you guys. And so we're able to model these different scenarios into the future and look at, okay, well, how quickly could we buy a practice? How quickly can we make some of these things that are important to us happen and coordinate them with one another? And we believe that that plan is a very important part of the process for a dentist. So we're going to talk about that in a moment. As it relates to purchasing a practice, developing your team early is a really important concept, right? People say, well, do I need a CPA? No, the answer is you don't. That being said, it's always better to have a relationship with somebody earlier so that when the decision that you need to make is more important, you already have that relationship. So I would say that's the same true of a CPA, attorney, financial advisor, a lender, and there's no reason why you can't meet with all these people now even. they'll meet with you. They absolutely will, because they look at it as, potential opportunities for the future. So if you're thinking that you're that person that I want to buy a practice, soon after I get out of school, there's no reason to be meeting with these people sooner rather than later. Even if you want to wait a few years, early on when you're an associate, begin to make some of these relationships, because this will be the team that you'll need when you ultimately go to purchase a practice. Defining your perfect practice is important, especially in the world that we're in right now. I'm not sure, if many of you have a pulse on what's happening out there, but there's like one practice available for every 5 dentists that want one. It's really, really hard to get a practice right now. And so you have to know what it is that you're looking for, so when the opportunity comes along, that you're able to snap it up. I have transition consultants, they don't even list their practices anymore. They call people like me, they say, Troy, here are the 3 practices that I've got right now. Know anyone? They don't even hit the listings. So again, the more that you can develop relationships with these people and so forth is really helpful in the world that we're in right now. But again, just knowing the type of practice that you want to have is a really important piece of the practice purchase equation. This is another thing that many people think, and they're fed this on both sides of the equation. I think many new dentists think this, and many practicing dentists believe this, that when you become an associate, well, that'll be the practice that you'll just ultimately buy into, right? I can't tell you how many dentists say, oh, I'm just gonna bring an associate in, they're gonna take my practice over and it will be wonderful. Statistically, happens about 10% of the time, almost never. If we really wanna make it happen, hyper communication and mutual understanding of expectations are the things that we kind of counsel both sides of the equation, to say, okay, if I'm gonna do this, this is what I want. And to the sellers to say, if I'm gonna actually give this as an offer, I'm gonna create some formality and some structure here to help that new dentist see that path forward. What more often happens is there's this carrot dangling out there that is a year, 3 years, 5 years. Doc, I'm 8 years into practice. I really want to buy it now. I'm not quite ready yet. So we see that a lot. So just important to go into that understanding it, that even if the doctor says, oh yeah, you'll absolutely buy my practice, doesn't always work. And you got to make sure that you're mutual understanding of expectations and hyper communication. So we won't go too far into that, but I really like to talk about that because it's talked about so much in the marketplace. As we talked about earlier, just meeting with the lenders, figuring out what you can afford, how much money is available. As Molly asked earlier, in terms of how much do you need? So the answer is 10%. Most banks want 10% somewhere in savings. Doesn't have to be liquid, but it has to be part, retirement plans, liquidity, etc., of whatever it is that they're going to lend you. So if it's $1 million practice, they want you to have $100,000 squirreled away somewhere within your assets. So, Molly, can we go over like 10 minutes? Is that all right? Understanding that some people might have to jump off.
Yes, I think that's great, because I think this is the most interesting things that people want to know about, like how do you buy that practice? I think this is key.
Okay, awesome. So we're just going to go through a quick profile here. So this is Nealon Dental. He's 27, single. Retirement goal is 65. Life expectancy is 95. 360 of student loan debt, which was last year's average. That number's probably up a little bit higher now. About $8,000 of savings, and is starting as an associate salary of $150,000. Goals and objectives, and I do just want to mention here, we are going to kind of gloss over this a little bit quickly. And what we want you to draw from it is the process behind what it is that we're looking at here, which is that we take an individual, understand what they're trying to achieve, and then look to model what all the different pathways that they have are to achieve those things. And that for a lot of people, this seems like it's so big and significant, but we absolutely have the capability to be able to do and evaluate these things. So again, the goals are to secure $25,000 in an emergency fund, begin saving 10% of gross income towards retirement, starting soon in their practice or in associateship, create a student loan payoff strategy, develop a saving and investment strategy for their discretionary income, make sure they have the appropriate risk management plan in place, disability, life, auto insurance, etc. Accumulate 10% of the practice purchase so they can qualify for a loan for their practice. Purchase a practice at around $1 million at the 5th year following the graduation, and buy a house, $300,000 with specialty financing. We don't have enough time to get into it, but there are loans that just you guys can qualify for that give you concessions that other people, just me, Rich, anyone else, aren't able to do because you're doctors. So just keep that in the mind for when that comes up in the future. Assumptions: they purchased their disability, they purchased life insurance, their surplus discretionary income is being invested, and it's earning about 6%. Their rate of return for retirement savings, and then an inflation rate. And again, we're not going to get into a ton of those details. So this is just looking at the assets that Nealon has, which is really just getting started, a little bit of savings, a car, and really mostly it's the lower side or in the red, which is the liability or the debt side of the equation. This is Nealon's budget. So if you look quickly over to the left, cable, cell phone, electricity, and then Nealon's decided that they want to just put everything into a monthly credit card. So $3,000 a month is how much they're able to spend in order to do the things that they want to do each month. So that's the budget, that $39,000. So the first thing that we do is going through the evaluation of how quickly should we pay off debt? Which debt period is most appropriate to reach towards the objectives that we have? So the first option would be a 10-year payoff, which at a 4.5% interest rate is a $3,700 a month payment. So again, this is where things get a little bit crazy, and we're not going to dive into the numbers, but what I want you to understand here is that what we're doing is going through an evaluation to see what we accomplish within our goals based on these numbers. So all the things that we talked about earlier in terms of the decisions that Nealon has already made is in here, and we're evaluating it in the context of a 10-year loan payoff.
Right, so understand what we're saying is we start working in, and if you look at the top line in 2019 per this example here, and you're making $150,000 a year every year, and what we're doing is going along and we're putting money towards savings and we're putting money towards retirement goal that we had outlined. And one of the things that we're talking about is you have to pick choose a debt repayment option, and we're choosing an accelerated one because we are going to spend less in interest, and we're going to see, can we pay off our debt quickly like that, save the money that we need, also save enough money to get the 10% down payment that we need to buy a practice. The 10% in assets that we need to buy a practice, also buy a house, all these things at once. We've then basically taken the crystal ball and said, okay, let's push this out into the future and say, where are we? Have we incurred more debt? Have we done what we've wanted to? Have we met our goals? And that's what this whole process does. And there's a lot of numbers that we're not going to go into the detail, but that's the 10,000 foot level summary of it. Is this is how much we're making, and we're trying to accomplish all these goals. Can we get there based on the assumptions that we outlined?
Yeah, and so this first scenario, it takes until 2030 in order to accumulate that 10% that we need, because all of our money is really going towards making that $3,700 a month student loan payment. And I'm going to show this in a different context in a moment. So what this begins to look at is how much have we accumulated at retirement, and what's been sort of our lifetime wealth accumulation by running down this strategy. And again, I think we're a little over ambitious in the number of slides we have for our time allotted for tonight. But in a 10-year summary, it essentially says, no, we were not able to accumulate all the goals that we had. And so when we go through a 15-year and a 20-year summary, just to let the cat out of the bag, we were not able to accomplish our objectives with any of those. In the context of the student loan decision, it took until year 6 with a 20-year payoff for this individual to have that 10% saved to be able to purchase that practice. If they did a 10-year payoff, it took them to year 12. So if we kind of cut through everything here, what the relevance is that the student loan decision that you make can have an impact on how much you have left over to save, which can have an impact on how quickly you can buy your practice, could have an impact on being able to buy a practice. And if you look at the difference in income that you might be able to earn in a practice compared to an associateship, that 6 years could be worth a lot of money, right? It could be, is it an extra 100,000 a year? Is it 200,000 a year? So that could be $1 million decision by making one loan payment decision compared to another one. And we think that that carries a lot of water because sometimes, again, might have a parent financial advisor who says, pay off your debt as quickly as you can. The problem is for a dentist, that might be completely counterintuitive.
So that goes back to your earlier question, Molly, as far as how long does it usually take? There's a lot of different factors, but all other things being equal, just simply how much money you're putting from your cash flow towards your debt payment is a significant factor in how long it's going to take you to accumulate the assets that you need.
So then what we do is go through, much like we talked about with the budgeting, is an iterative process of different scenarios. So we said, okay, well, what if we delay our home purchase? What if we don't buy our home 3 years after we're out of training? What if we keep renting and focus on trying to get that practice first before we get into our house? So in this scenario, we made the decision to do a 20-year debt repayment, but we decided in this case to buy a $400,000 house. If you recall, the last one was a $300,000 house, but we're going to delay it until year 7 rather than trying to do it in year 3, which is what we had mentioned a minute ago. We still want to purchase that $1 million practice. We want to earn an additional $100,000 a year for $250,000 annually. So the assumption that we're making there is that we're making an extra $100,000 a year if we can purchase a practice rather than being an associate. And again, we have to be careful with that assumption, but that's what we're making it in this scenario. And we're going to save the surplus cash, and it's also saying that we're selling the practice in retirement. But again, same thing, numbers, dip, 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 dip. I'm just going to skip through this here to get to the point. And essentially, what we came to is that we could accomplish all of our objectives. So again, the idea is we ran the first scenario, it didn't work. We went back to the drawing board and came up with new goals and did it to make sure that we could make it work. And we did all of this before a decision was ever made. So that's the point behind everything that we just confusingly went through.
Right. And I think the major point that you want to understand is, as you can see, there's a lot that goes into this and a lot of different assumptions and a lot of things. The point that we're trying to make is this is not a decision that should be taken very lightly. And this is something that we seriously recommend getting help with and sitting down and making sure you're looking at all these different angles and all these different components of this prior to making any decision, because certain decisions that you make, like purchasing a home right out of dental school or taking an accelerated debt payment, all of those things are going to have long-term impacts. Some could be very positive, but some could be not so positive. It's just understanding how those are going to affect you and seeing them with real numbers that are going to allow you to make the best decision for you.
Yeah, and it's understanding, right? Some of you aren't going to come out of school with any debt at all, and this doesn't apply to you, right? Others have undergraduate debt still. So again, it's really understanding your situation and the different decisions that you're going to make. So the last piece here, and again, we have to be careful with this, and I've talked to Professor Palucci about this a number of times as well, but the idea of practice purchase and the idea that, again, how are we maximizing the leverage of our degree, right? And what we say is with practice purchase, that's really what you're doing, right? Is that ability to, if I'm going to make 150,000 as an associate, if I can make 250, 350, 400 by purchasing a practice, what are some of those advantages and how do I make that happen? We also understand that not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody wants to be a business owner, but we do want to at least share this concept around sort of, again, that maximizing your degree through practice purchase. And so just kind of running through some of the things here: additional income, practice equity that can be sold after the fact, right? When you retire at 65, you can then sell that practice. When we create retirement plans, we have more flexibility with practices than we do when you work at a practice. You're essentially just beholden to the dentist that you work for whatever retirement plan they may or may not have. Some don't even have them, believe it or not. I've seen it more times than you'd think. So we have more flexibility around saving more for retirement when we own our own practice. So again, we're not here saying that that's the only option, but we are saying that when we look through a financial lens, practice ownership provides a lot more long-term wealth in most cases than associateship does. I'm gonna go through this here. So the last one is our last scenario, and then we're gonna be done for tonight, is we purchase a Porsche. We get through training, we denied ourselves everything that we always wanted. We're making $150,000 a year now, and we're living with mom and dad, so we're gonna go buy a Porsche. It's $80,000, it's a $1,500 car payment a month, but we can handle that now, right? We've got, what do we have coming in? $10,000 a month, I think, from our example. That's not a big deal. Well, what the end result was essentially is that the lifetime impact to wealth was $2.5 million and $630,000 at retirement, different by purchasing a Porsche than had we not. So the conclusion is buy a Porsche if you want to, but make sure you have the wealth and the income to be able to support it. Because if not, it could have pretty big consequences on some of the things that you want to do later. So that's sort of a fun one. So again, just to say, Rich and I are willing to meet and do meet with Tufts students regularly. We really want to be a resource for you. Again, anything that we can do to support Tufts is again, something that we're very much committed to. Thank you very much. We're certainly continuing to stick around and answer any questions. You can certainly reach out to us. The email on the screen is there if you have any specific questions. There will be a survey that will be sent out to everyone as well, just so we can know how we're doing. And if you have questions, certainly feel free to use that as a place as well.
And I think we can answer, I think it was the chat was one way that questions can be asked right now. And did you say there was another function or another way that if someone wanted to ask a question?
Yep, like so on your bar, you can actually raise your hand and we can unmute you, so you can actually ask your question and we can have a real conversation together if anybody would like to do that. But we do have one question here. How do they look at credit? How do they look at your credit score if you have big student loans from undergrad and dental school? Well, this is an amazing little trick, believe it or not, that because you have credit history, oftentimes, and you might not have ever even made a payment, and believe it or not, that has a significant positive impact on your credit. Oftentimes people come out of medical and dental school with incredible credit scores, and so it's sort of yours to lose. So oftentimes very favorably, believe it or not. I already own a house. Should I sell my house while I'm in school? So that's I'd say a question that would, our favorite answer, right, Rich? It depends.
Right.
I think that depends on a number of different factors. Certainly the real estate market right now is pretty favorable. But I think that would be a question that I would say it depends. And again, always happy to have a conversation one-on-one if that would be helpful. On average, how much is malpractice insurance for oral surgery or endodontics range? That's a great question. So, in most cases, those things are going to be handled by your employer. So I'm going to kind of punt that question. So in most cases, you're not going to have to purchase your own malpractice coverage. You're going to go and be an associate somewhere, and that's going to be handled by the practice. So I think that's how I'm going to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, if you are a business owner and you have to get your own, there are certain companies. Troy and I do not work in the malpractice industry. That's a very specific, targeted industry. So I wouldn't be able to, we wouldn't be able to give you kind of a direct number here, but it is something certainly that you want to make sure that you understand if you're going to be running your own business and you need to get your own malpractice insurance.
Yeah, and so again, kind of if you look at it like generalists and specialists, that would be one of the specialists on our team that we work with. And that malpractice is generally connected to your liability and so forth within your practice as well. So it'll become a whole range of products that you'll need in order to do that. So malpractice is just one of the many coverages you'll need when you own a practice. What is the standard way that practices for sale are valued? Is it turnover, purchase price, or in another way? So usually it's a percentage of collections. And the way it has kind of historically been is somewhere in like the 60 to 80% range of collections. Right now, there's practices in Boston going for 110, 120 of collections, and that's just a function of how tight the market is. So it's a very different market that people are buying into today than they might have bought in 10 years ago. And let me also say this, as associates, you guys are incredibly valuable. I don't think I have one practice right now, I don't say I don't have one, but not many practices who aren't looking for some extra help somewhere. And so many of them are looking for associates. So I take that to just say, hey, when you're out there looking, understand that, know that. You don't have to take your first offer, and really know where you want to be and what you want to do. And my guess is you guys are going to be able to write your own tickets. And certainly feel free to call me, because I have lots of practices that are looking for associates right now. But it's important to understand that sometimes I think you come out and you're a little bit humble and don't necessarily know where you want to be, and I'll just kind of take the offer that comes along. Please don't do that. Know really what it is that you want, and you should be able to in many ways, write your own ticket right now. Practices are sold for typically a certain percent of 1 year of revenue. Yep. Can you typically get financing for the full amount? Oh, this is great. So yes. In fact, oftentimes they'll give you 110% of your financing. So this is the other thing. And sometimes people feel like, oh, I can't buy a practice because as long as you can show that 10% in the background, oftentimes the bank is going to give you money, and again, they'll give you even more money than you need as a line of credit. So again, going back to a really cool time to be a dentist when you have banks throwing money at you. I had a promotion from Bank of America, which is one of the big lenders in your industry, and they're at like 3% or something to borrow money. You're borrowing money for 10 to 15 years at 3% at 110% of the loan amount. Come on now. Sorry, I get excited about this stuff. You mentioned the benefits of specialty due to time value of money. Is it actually more financially sensible to practice straight after graduation than specializing? Oh, this is a big one. We've had this question a lot. I can't always draw, I have to be really careful when I answer this question, by the way, as well. You really have to give thought to this and talk to professors and experts in the industry, other experts in the industry. What I'll say is this, is that I haven't seen a definitive, clear path of specialization financially. Are there specialists that make a ton of money? Absolutely. Are there generalists that make a ton of money? Absolutely. Do I have some generalists that make more than specialists? Absolutely. Do I have some specialists that make more than generalists? Absolutely. So it's who you are and how you want to practice. Right? I mean, if you're going to build an empire and you want to own 10 practices, you can be a general dentist and do that, perfectly well and make a lot of money. So specialization is one way to get to a financial outcome. I think the way I answer that question is, where's your passion? I think don't let the financial tail wag the decision the specialization dog, if that makes sense. Right? Where does your heart take you? And then can you get to a good financial outcome both ways? And I think the answer is yes. I have some other thoughts on the matter, and I'm happy to talk kind of one-off. It's a little bit hard to do in a group setting like this. But the answer is I have not seen a definitive path. I've seen both sides can do very, very well. Does the relative scarcity of practices for sale for dentists looking reflect the need for dentists to start a new practice? Or do you think that existing number of practices reflect market saturation? So I think there's a few things in play here. One is a lot of dentists, and COVID kind of did this. They decided, I don't want to be an associate anymore. I want to own a practice. Now, I should also say that the market was tight beforehand, but what happened during COVID is in the beginning stages, the associates were sort of the low people on the totem pole, and they didn't get the cases, and their incomes went down, and they sacrificed. And a lot of them kind of said, geez, this isn't where I want to be. I want to kind of own I want to own my own destiny, if you will. The other piece is, I think dentistry is just pretty hot right now. There's just a lot of demand. People have money. So I don't know if I have a great, I think I'd say at almost 8:30 at night after a long day, maybe let me think about that one a little bit and we can have a conversation offline. What are your thoughts about buying into a practice versus building your own practice from scratch? I love this question. So both can work. That being said, though, when you buy a known quantity that can cash flow immediately, that's pretty darn exciting, right? When you build a practice from scratch, you've got a run-up period of 1, 2, 3, 4 years. In most cases, you can't start up a practice without working at another practice at the same time. You just can't generate the cash flow that you need. So when you think of it in that light, if you can jump into a practice that's making $1 million, $1.5 million a year already, the bank is going to give you 100, 110% of that amount, and they're going to do it at a 3% interest rate, and you have all the infrastructure of that practice already set up, and you can jump into it and make money from day one. That's a pretty compelling argument. But again, there are certain circumstances where I think starting a practice can work really well also, but there's definitely something to be said about cash flowing from day one with a existing practice. So, I like this question too. So this is around structure of savings accounts. So to me, sort of the ideal structure is a working checking that sort of everything comes into, a working savings that is sort of, you'll go back and forth between savings and checking. So if you're, going to buy a plane ticket and you need to fly home and you need to have a little bit of extra money, you might have that in your working savings and you could transfer that into your checking. But your emergency fund, oftentimes, I like to say, is off on an island at a completely different bank even, is sort of a barrier to access, right? If you've got, so a typical rule of thumb for emergency reserves is like 3 to 6 months of expenses, 3 to 6 months. So, if it takes you $10,000 a month to run your household, you should have between $30,000 and $60,000 just sitting in emergency savings. You don't want that in your checking account, right? That could change your behaviors and a myriad of other things. So you want that sort of off on an island in another bank. And so that was the question. Should the emergency fund be commingled or should that be somewhere else? Yeah, so this is thank you. So this can be really overwhelming is the question. And how do we begin to think about this? And should we be reaching out to somebody like you now, after school? When is the best time to do it? Again, we want to be a resource to you guys in any way we can be. So do we commonly have conversations while you're in school? Absolutely. Sometimes those conversations will only be 10 or 15 minutes and it will be, hey, this is what we think. Why don't we talk again when you get out, get out of school? Everything looks good to us right now, but we're happy to have those conversations. I'm going to go to one of the things that I said earlier, which is just building that team before you really need it, right? It's that idea that I'm going to make relationships with people before the questions are difficult, right? And so then when those questions are more difficult, I'm going to trust what that person has to say. So again, it's just that idea of developing those relationships. So I'd say we've developed our practice to work with people exactly at the stage that you're at all the way through to the end. So I'd say we're proponents of that, but everybody has to make the decision of when the right time is to invite someone like us in. But we're certainly willing to have those conversations, on the earlier side. Can I get a loan straight out of school from a bank for a practice? So the answer, I believe, is yes. However, it's going to be limited. Most banks will have sort of an upper threshold of what they'll lend as of day one. Is it 360 or 400? Don't quote me, but there's a threshold to it. I'd say we don't see that as much. I know that it happens, but we don't see as many people buy a practice like after graduation. There's a little bit of a cooling off period. Not always, again, you certainly can, but I'd say that's from my experience. I see less of that than more. What do you say we do a couple more of these and then we'll close it down, Molly? Does that sound good? It looks like, well, I think we do have 2 more, okay. What should we look for or avoid when looking for a financial advisor? I checked your website, I'll be living in the state. Yeah, I mean, I think just why don't we take sort of a general tack to this question. You know, I think the hard part, and Rich alluded to it a little bit earlier, is you know, I think your situation is different than the friends that you graduated undergrad with who might be attorneys now, right? The decisions and the consequences that a medical professional, a dental professional is going to make are just different than many people that you graduated with. And again, I use this example because it is something that we get where a parent's financial advisor will give a set of advice that unfortunately we don't believe is correct. Because to the general population, that advice might be correct. But when you put it through the lens of what a dentist might be trying to accomplish, it might not be. And so we believe that people who are versed at working with dentists, you know, again, I guess we have some bias here and I have to state that, right? But we believe that people that have, you know, it's like a surgeon. I'm give a quick example, and I'm sorry, I know it's late. My son was getting hernia surgery, and we're up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire area on the seacoast of New Hampshire. And my doctor said, we're gonna go down to Wellesley. I was like, Wellesley, it's only a hernia surgery. Like, it's no big deal. He's like, do you want them dusting off the machine to do the surgery? Or do you want like your son to be the 12th in line that day? And I was like, good point. That's what you get, I think, when you work with somebody who's used to working with dentists and physicians and so forth, is that we've seen what you guys are going to be thinking about in the future, and we understand that the approach that needs to be taken in order to make those things happen. So again, I know it's a little self-serving and maybe a bit of a commercial, but we've seen people get advice that we don't believe is in your best interest if you're not working with somebody that understands how to work with dentists. I hope I said that okay, Rich.
Perfectly.
Not necessarily. So I heard that there's typically large patient turnover when you buy an existing practice. There can be, right? There are tactics and strategies of how to manage that correctly. But I would say more times than not, that can be managed very well. And you know, I've seen very good luck with practices really losing very little, so very little attrition. You know, again, always a concern, but I don't think I would not look at that as something to be commonplace. This is our last one. So this is about somebody who's a non-traditional student a little bit later, and will they have an easier experience buying a practice right out of dental school than someone who might not have that same experience? It's a great question, and I'm not sure. What I can tell you is that what the banks care about, it's all about cash flow, and they need to know that you have the ability to generate the cash flow that they're going to lend the money to you, you know, at that level. And so I don't know if you could prove that that experience somehow, you know, that experience allows you to generate cash flow and be more productive and a faster, you know, dentist and you know, again, generate a higher revenue, then maybe you could make that argument. I don't know that specifically though. Well, that was a lot, guys. That was longer than we said, but we still have plenty of people on the call, so hopefully that means that that some of this information was valuable. So again, we're certainly here as a resource. It's always an honor. We're always humbled to speak with this group. It's such a great group, and you know, again, I'm going to say it again. I don't know if Louise said she might be on the call tonight, but if she's not, you guys have an incredible gift in Professor Paolucci. We've been doing this for a long time, and when she came in, it was like, holy moly, do you guys need the stuff that she's teaching? And believe it or not, up until I've never really seen it. It just doesn't get taught. So know that you've got a huge gift, use her, and also use your financial aid department, the same thing. A lot of schools do not have that depth of talent and ability to help you in the way that they do. So please use them because they're a huge resource. I'm done. Mic drop. Anything else, Molly, before we close up tonight?
No, thank you for presenting tonight. And I just want to thank everyone who came in and shared all the questions. And it's always great when people have a lot of questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. We love it. And we love it when we can do that during the presentation. And maybe in hindsight, we went over anyways, so maybe we should have done it. But it's great to get all those questions. And again, please feel free to reach out if there's anything else we can do. Have a great evening, everyone. Oops.